Today, our guest speaker is retired Colonel Dr. Robert Adams, Jr. Doc Adams began his military career at the U.S. Naval Academy before serving as a division officer and navigator on the USS Hamner. Adams continued his Navy career, becoming a commander of the U.S. Navy SEALs. He changed military branches to the Army in 1987 and graduated from medical school at Wake Forest University, leading him to become command surgeon for the Army Delta Forces. Doc Adams also was commander of the Robinson Health Clinic with the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg. After retirement from the military, Doc continued his medical practice and now is on the board of directors for the Veterans Life Center in Butner. That facility provides housing and training for men and women in life transition from the military in order to secure their future in civilian life. Now, it's my honor to introduce Colonel Dr. Robert Adams, Jr.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. You know, my job today is, I've been instructed by the whole vet folks, is to inspire and entertain. And I'm going to do that by telling you a little bit about my life and its successes and failures. One of the things that I discovered very early on in my life was I loved uniforms. Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts, bangles and beads, merit badge sashes. I made Eagle Scout at 14 and still needed to do more things. So went into Order of the Arrow, got that sash. And, then I went into Explorer Scouts because I ran out of things to do there, got another uniform. And, it was fun. And I found myself at 16 years old, just living the dream life of a 16-year-old. I lived in a room off from the garage, away from the main house, all by myself. I had a paper route, so some money. I had a BB gun that I could shoot squirrels with, and I had a motorcycle. Life was good. And the one thing I knew at 16 years old was that I wanted nothing to do with the military. Even though I come from a long, long line of military, my dad was Naval Academy. My granddad was a vice admiral superintendent of the Naval Academy. My great-granddads, two of them, were West Pointers, both a colonel and a brigadier general, and their fathers, one of whom I'm writing my third book about, fought in the Civil War on the Union side. And their commissioning certificates signed by Abraham Lincoln are on my wall upstairs. But I wanted nothing to do with it. So at 16 years, I was sitting in my bed in the back room reading through my Reader's Digest, and up pops an article that said Super Commandos of the Wetlands. And it was Reader's Digest announcing the existence of the super secret Navy SEALs that had been formed 5 years before by President Kennedy. And I read that article and it hit me right in the heart. And I said, oh my, that's what I'm going to do with my life. And so all of a sudden, things changed. I put the book down. I walked into the house. I found my dad. I said, Dad, I want to be a Navy SEAL. He didn't know what that was, and neither did my mom. But when I said, and so I want to go to the Naval Academy because if I'm going to be a SEAL, I might as well be an officer. If I'm going to be an officer, I might as well go to the Naval Academy. And so he almost dropped his bourbon and Lucky Strike cigarette right there on the porch. But 1 year later at 17, I entered the Naval Academy, showed up there saying, I want to be a Navy SEAL. And they said, no, you don't. Navy SEALs can't make admiral. It's, special forces is not what we do. We train admirals here. So for 4 years, I kind of kept that to myself. And it ended up being irrelevant because in my senior year, the Naval Academy Service Selection Night happened. And there were only 3 SEAL slots for my class at 889. And they're given out by class rank. And I was down there in the middle. So it didn't happen for me. I chose a destroyer out of San Francisco. The USS Hamner waited for me on graduation. But I did think to myself, I still want to do this. And the opportunity might present again. So I used my 30 days of free vacation that all graduates get. And I went down to Key West, Florida, to underwater swimmer school. And learned to be a diver and got my little silver third-class diver's pin. And halfway through that training class, a Navy SEAL instructor that just happened to be there came up and said, hey, Mr. Adams, we're trying to hurt you here, and you are smiling way too much. Have you ever thought about being a Navy SEAL? I went, well, funny you should mention it. Yes, I have, but I got a ship at sea waiting for me. He goes, well, think about it. And I did. And I thought, wow, this is pretty exciting. The opportunity might show itself up again. But I ended up spending a year and a half on that ship at sea. A year into it, some Navy SEAL recruiters came to San Francisco looking for bodies. And I ran off that ship as fast as I could, took the screening test, and found myself in Coronado, California, with Bud's training class 81 and was one of 11 out of 70 men that tried to finish that training. And that, by the way, that training is what my first book is about, 6 Days of Impossible, where I talk about our hell week. 6 days of no sleep, soaking wet, freezing cold, shivering uncontrollably. Only one of 3 officers to make it. But I graduated that training to the best job in my life I've ever had, a platoon commander in the SEAL teams. And I loved it. I literally would resent having to go to sleep for 8 hours before I could get up and do it again. So, the life led me where I wanted to be, and I tried and I waited and I got there. But 5 years into my service, which is my Naval Academy required time of service, we were in a post-Vietnam drawdown. I'd been trained by Medal of Honor winners and Vietnam veterans, but now the military was drawn down, and it wasn't as much, fun for a young man as I thought it would be. So I said, you know what I'll do? I'll go seek my fortune elsewhere. And I made another mistake in my life. I transferred to the Navy SEAL Reserves and went to seek my fortune in the money world. Went to Virginia to start working on developing patents in solar energy and methane gas production with a friend of mine. Hadn't been there 6 months when I said, oh my, I made a mistake. Turns out they don't have 30 days of free vacation in the civilian world, and healthcare isn't free. I picked up the phone, called the Navy SEAL, said, bring me back. I made a terrible mistake. And they went, well, Lieutenant, thank you very much, but stay in the reserves. We're still in a drawdown. We don't need more Navy SEALs. I went, dang. All right. So I was in Virginia now and trying to figure out what I'm going to do next. The patents that we started got done, but one of my senior partners said, I don't want any government grant money. And we never were able to develop those patents, and they sat on the shelf and expired. So the next adventure began when I said, well, what am I going to do? So I went to a bank and borrowed $250,000, rented a J.C. Penney store that was empty, and converted it into a restaurant and a mini shopping mall. And that worked for a while, and until I realized I didn't know much about the restaurant business, and ended up selling that, moving to a city down the road in Lexington, Virginia, which is a college town, and opened a smaller restaurant, which was immediately successful. My brother came and joined me, and we did really well until the Alcohol Beverage Control Board came in and said, you're doing too many alcohol sales here and not enough food, so we're taking your liquor license away. I went, well, I didn't see that one coming. So I left the restaurant with my brother, and he sold it to Arby's, and I went back to school. And I finished my MBA, married the woman of my dreams, and she's going to factor into this story a little bit later, and dragged her off to Washington, D.C. as a brand new MBA, working there for Naval Sea Systems Command, doing special forces kinds of, contract work. And interestingly, my son was born there, and I had been working maybe 6 months when I came home and said, sweetheart, I hate my job. What? She says, you're 30 years old, you got a son, what do you want to do? I said, well, this is going to sound funny, but I want to be a Navy SEAL platoon commander again, and that's not an option. So I think I'd like to go to medical school. She goes, well, that means we got 7 years of poverty ahead, but, we were poor and happy when we got married, and we can be poor and happy again. So give it a shot. You're probably too old anyway. But 3.5 years later, after working full time during the day and going back to school at night, I found myself at Wake Forest University on an Army scholarship. And I took off my Navy commander's hat, and I became an Army second lieutenant to start over again. And by the way, that would have happened even if I'd stayed in the Navy. But the Navy only offered me a 3-year scholarship. The Army said 4, and so I changed uniforms, because by now I had 2 children, and I'm 36 years old starting medical school. And we started our 7 years of poverty. Now, in the 4th year of my medical school, we get to go and visit residency programs on active duty. And I went in my 3rd year and 4th year to Madigan Army Medical Center in Washington State and said, this is where I want my residency. And the residency director said, Bob, we met you in your 3rd year. You're not supposed to come back to the same place fourth year. And I said, well, except when I fill out my 5 choices for residency, it's going to say Madigan and kill me, kill me, kill me, kill me. And he smiled and said, all right, Bob, I get the message. But what I did just to make sure was I rented some scuba tanks and I went to the Hood Canal where I had been on my third year. And I knew where the Dungeness crabs lived, which were great, big, delicious crabs. Filled up a cooler, picked up the phone, called the residency director and said, Colonel, you said us medical students could call you if we had a problem. He goes, I did. And what's your problem, Bob? And I said, well, sir, I got a cooler full of Dungeness crabs and no place to cook them. And I could hear him smile on the phone, and there was a brief pause, and he goes, and what time can I expect you, Bob? So he bought the beer and I bought the crabs and I got my residency program. So use the experiences you got. Sometimes it comes in handy. Well, after my residency, which was a delightful experience, I found myself at Fort Bragg, North Carolina at my request, because that's the only place that doctors can jump out of airplanes. And it's the only place that anybody can jump out of airplanes in the Army. And as soon as I got there, Delta Force knocked on my door, said, you're wearing an Army uniform with a seal patch on it. You want to come play with us? And I said, no, not right now. I got babies to deliver. I got a teaching spot. I need to get a little better at this doctoring business, but check back with me in 2 years. And 2 years later, how about now? And I went, well, actually, now's pretty good. And so I ended up being the command surgeon for the Army's Delta Force for the next 3.5 years and did what they do and deployed with them for quick reaction forces. And I actually got selected for colonel while I was there. So as a full bird, I stepped out back into the regular Army world, signed to the 82nd Airborne. And next thing I know, they invited me to go to Iraq with them. So I went to Iraq 2003 and 4 with them, found myself in the middle of a desert in an old bombed out airfield. And I bring that up because those of you that have been to Afghanistan and Iraq, they already know what I'm going to tell you. War is not fun. It's not fun for soldiers and not fun for doctors. And one night I was sitting there in my clinic, 2 a.m., and the phone rings, says, doc, stand by. We're sending an ambulance your way with an enemy combatant in it with gunshot wounds who needs to be passed on to the surgeons. But we're going to do an ambulance transfer. And I went, why ambulance? Well, it's raining outside and the helicopters weren't flying for the rare event that happened that night. So I called for another doctor and a medic to join me. My entire staff showed up because this is a big deal. And next thing we know, we've got a enemy combatant with gunshot wounds in the chest and abdomen, an arm that's barely hanging on with a tourniquet in place. And we couldn't get an IV in. And I called my pediatrician. I said, hey, you can put an IV in the baby's scalp, put an IV in this guy. And he couldn't get one either. I thought, well, what am I going to do? Well, I'd had advanced trauma life support training, and I pulled the book out and laid it on his legs and made a cut on his ankle, found a vein, threaded an IV in it, sewed him up, and we got an IV in, we got morphine in, and we got him in the ambulance, and is ready to go. And we're all high-fiving each other because this is a pretty big save. My pediatrician's in the ambulance trying to tell the medic how to, deal with this patient during the 3.5-hour drive ahead. And he leans out and he goes, doc, you got to let me go. I said, Captain, you can't go. You're a doctor. This is medics. Ambulance gets shot at, and I need you here. And he says, doc, you got to let me go. And against the rules, he and I agreed that he could go. And I really wasn't sure why. But when I wrote my second book, about 33 years of doctoring at War and Peace, there's a chapter in there that I sent to him. I said, I wrote the story of what you did that night. And he goes, well, you don't know all of it, because he went to the convoy commander, ambulance in the middle, shooters on both ends, and goes, this soldier's not going to make it on a 3.5-hour ride, but it's raining. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. If we ride real fast right through bad guy country, we can be to the surgeon's office in 45 minutes. And, to this commander's credit, he let them do it. And they drove quickly through the bad guy country. That enemy combatant lived. And I got to comment, that I'm always proud looking back at the United States military in a war zone. We treat our enemies with the same care and compassion that we treat our soldiers when they're injured, because they're out of the fight and we have a job, and that's saving lives. So Captain Craig Dobson, who's now Colonel Craig Dobson, a pediatrician in the Army, is my hero to this day. But the retirement came soon after that, and I found myself wanting to get out into the civilian world, which is really, really different than the military world. And as I was waiting to decide where I was going to go, a letter arrives and said, we got a clinic just outside of Raleigh that needs a doctor, and if you want it, we'll give it to you. And it was a mass mailing, and I showed it to my wife, and I said, hey, what do you think? She goes, well, our son lives in Raleigh, let's do it. So I said, all right, stay there, sell the house, I'm gone. Went up, started a new clinic as a civilian doctor 4 days into that clinic experience, I called my wife and said, I made another terrible mistake. This place is a disaster. It's drug addicts, drug seekers, and unhappy staff. And in the middle of my rant, she says, excuse me, hold on. How many clinics did you run in the Navy? I mean, Army. And she goes, 5. I said, yeah, 5. And then how many of them were disasters when you took them over? I said, all of them. Yep. And how many won awards for excellence after you took them over? Okay, I see where you're going. She goes, you're right. Shut up and fix it, because you just signed a 3-year contract and I'm down here selling our house. And 11 months later, that clinic won Best Clinic, Eastern Wake County, and everybody was happy again. And it was the reason I tell that story. It was making an unhappy staff happy. It wasn't that hard. It was just, can I give you permission to do what you need to do to be happy? Can I be the best boss you've ever had? Can we focus on taking care of patients? And we did, and we won awards. And we grew so fast, I ended up going to the bank 3 years later, and saying, could you lend me a few $1,000,000 so I can build a bigger clinic across the street? And they did. And my wife late in life said, I believe in you. Go ahead, risk everything we own and have ever earned and all our future children's income on this next adventure. And for 13 years, I practiced medicine in a 14,000 square foot facility that I designed and built myself. Retired last year and look back on it going, I can't believe you let me do it. And she said, I believed in you. And I will tell you, I'm going to end my story there by telling you that there's a few lessons in this story that I want you to remember. One is, find a life partner if you can that believes in you and supports you the way that my wife did. Find a husband that'll, love you and support you during the good times and the bad times. And if you do that, the probability of happiness, goes way up. And also, if you haven't picked up on this one, failure is not a bad thing. Failure eventually leads to success in life. And if you find that success, it's because you found jobs that make you happy. And that's probably the third and the final lesson. Life will give you clues. Listen to those clues and pick the direction that will make you happy. And when you interview for your next job, ladies and gentlemen, ask your boss if he or she is happy. And if she's not, look for another job. I loved being a SEAL. I loved being a doctor. Not a day went by that wasn't genius for me. But there was lots of trouble in between. So know that the trouble's out there. Know that it's coming. Know that those challenges will lead to successes in the future. So thank you all for letting me tell you this story. Know that the future is bright and the military is a great life. If you're not sure whether to get out, stay in. But thank you all, whole vet, for what you're doing. Thank you for letting me tell my story. And thank you all for your service. God bless.